Hello, my name is Peter Veenstra. I'm one of the partners of LOLA Landscape Architects, Office for Landscape Architecture based in Rotterdam. CANactions, thank you very much for inviting me today to do this lecture. I have to admit it's my first Zoom lecture, so it's also a bit exciting, not seeing the audience. I hope it will go well. Anastasia asked me to first say a bit about our office and how we are now also dealing with Corona lockdown. Well, it's I think it has not been bad for our office. So I think we're in a situation where we're kind of in a relaxed mode of working half in the office and half from home. At this moment, I'm in the office and so are 10 to 12 other people. Maybe I can shortly give you a quick tour so you get an impression of, let's say, how we are situated right now. So, as you can see, many desks empty. Some desks. Okay. So then also obviously, here the rule is everyone needs to stay 1.5 meters distant from each other. Not sure if it's happening there, but yeah, it works. Yeah, so sort of 50% here. It's completely empty at the moment. The rest is working from home. I'll walk back to the room. This is usually where I do my online meetings. So today I would like to talk about forestry. When CANactions asked me to do this lecture, I thought let's do something that fascinates us at this moment. Forestry is something we're in the middle of. We discovered it as a very interesting topic. We're researching it at the moment and we're developing first projects, but we're in a very early stage. So it's not, I won't be able to show you sort of beautiful end results. I'll share the process with you because I think it's worth, I hope to be able to make you also enthusiastic for the topic, because I think more designers should engage with this nowadays. Okay, well, 1 second. I start with a quote. Midway in our life's journey, I went astray from the straight road and woke to find myself alone in a dark wood. This dramatic quote is from Dante's Inferno. And this is, let's say, the moment the main character gets lost. And this is sort of the start of his journey into hell. I found it interesting because it says maybe something on about our office and how we got to this point, how we ended up in these forests, and makes you also wonder what it might lead to. So this is what the presentation is about. Here you see an overview of my slides. I have 193 slides, but I promised I'll go through them in a fairly fast pace. So the first part is showing sort of our first projects that dealt with forests in general. Then a bit about dealing with climate change and how to deal with that as a landscape architect. And then how we discovered forestry as an answer to climate change. Then we get a bit into the hardcore data. I think it's important, but it will need a bit of your concentration. And then I'll show our first attempt to engage with forestry. And then we're at the end. And first, to get into the mood, just some nice pictures of forests. Because I think everyone has their own image of a forest, and we look at it on a global scale. And obviously there is a huge variety in different types of forests. You can find many forms of beauty in there. This is officially, it's a kelp forest, but it's the official definition of a forest is a lot of trees on land. And these are both not trees, and it's not on land. Still, it's officially a kelp forest. It's interesting. Okay, forests are a very important part of our landscape. Obviously, as part of ecosystems, as biotopes, but also from a cultural perspective. If we look at our landscape, the classical way to subdivide this into categories would be to see it as gardens, controlled landscape, and wilderness. So these are the famous three landscapes. And even though a lot of forests are actually planted, they appeal to us as a place of wilderness. And this is sort of a very essential category of landscape that we need in our lives. It's a place for natural encounters. This is an image that we had on the book cover of our first monography. It's a place for the individual. This is a book cover of Walden, Life in the Woods, a famous book of Henry Thoreau, which is describing his retreat in a forest, discovering the forest as a place to live and to reinvent yourself, to reconnect with yourself. And this was a very influential book for the nature movement that followed. It's a place of freedom. This is kind of a cheesy image, but I liked it. Sherwood Forest next to Nottingham. It's a place of adventure. And in line with that, here you can see some film shots from an amazing Dutch movie, The Noorderlingen, The Northerners, that takes place in the start of a new town. And you can see all the sand still surrounding it. First part constructed. And next to that first street, there is a dark forest. And that's a whole setting of the movie. So there is this sort of new town and there's the dark forest. And this is, they both play a beautiful role in that movie. Like all the civil, polite interactions take place in this street. And all the dark stuff happens in this small forest. So it's in the movie like this essential space for activities. So clearly, we always were interested in forests as a space for people, as a space people need for the full range of their behavior and need as an experience. And as a place to escape from the city. And throughout the years, we've been working with forests, and there I want to show some of that work shortly. And it starts, I think, with the most, maybe the most poetic approach that we took on a forest, and it was an arts installation we made for arts festival close to Rotterdam. And there we were asked to make an expedition through the city, while other artists were also organizing expeditions. And we decided to actually reroute that exhibition to the landscape, to the forest, and to treat people on a natural experience. And the natural experience was focused around the sound of trees. so a sort of acoustic experience of a forest. So here you see the city where it took place. The cultural center was the starting point. And from there on, we took visitors of the festival on a route to the nearest forest. It's a plantation, as you can see, grid-based, where we organized a spatial experience in 64 trees, 8x8 trees in that forest. You can see the winter situation, typical Dutch forest. It's not very romantic, you could say. This also interested us to make use of that artificial forest to create this experience. And the idea was simple. It is to take the forest and to start shaking the trees. So you hear the rustling of the leaves. And with the rustling of those leaves, you can create sort of spatial acoustic patterns that run through this forest. We designed these different patterns, and we made them available via a phone. You could call a number, and then there is a choosing menu, and behind every number there is a different spatial pattern that will start to play in that forest. It was temporary. We created this tree shakers with a motor, with a pendulum that kind of started shaking, and that was mounted on the tree like that. Very provisionary, protected with a plastic plate on top against the rain. All these shakers had cables that were all coming together in this center. From there, via computers, we started these different patterns. And that was all happening in this caravan. And it was all powered by quite a large diesel generator. So this was sort of the backside of this nature experience. So this is in the center. We had a van. We invited people in, and then we kind of abducted them to the forest, blindfolded them, so they wouldn't know where they would go. And only in the forest we took off the blindfolds. And then we led them to these 64 trees. Here you can see the plates with the choosing menu. And then after a while, people would find out they could actually dial the number. And then, let's say, the music started. It was a beautiful, it was a beautiful, a very poetic and sensitive concert that we created here. And but it was temporary. It was just for 2 days or 3 days, and we had to take everything out again. In the end, there was some damage to the trees. We as you can see, these shaking motors. We tried to protect the trees with cloth, but still you can see they left some marks. And we recorded everything, and there is a vinyl record still available of these recordings. Afterwards, we wanted to do also a permanent version of this, and that we were able to do in Belgium, in Neerbelt, where there was actually not an existing forest available. So we plotted a new forest, slightly smaller because of budgetary reasons. And here we organized it all in a better way. We were hiding all the cables underground. And there it's actually permanently, still permanently, you can go there. It's public terrain. And here you can see the tree shakers, the trees, the central console where you have the choosing menu. And it's yeah, it's quite nice. It's less of this sort of mysterious experience because it's out in the open. It's a small forest, but as a musical instrument, it works. Here you see the console with the telephone number. And here you see the sort of upgraded version of these tree shakers, completely rainproof, with laser cut pendulums, and also the cables better organized. Here you see it in the evening. We always combine it with lamps, so you can also, let's say, you know where to listen to in a way. So the acoustic information is combined with a bit of visual information. And what's great about that it's permanent is that it's also is there in different times of the year. And this was an amazing video someone made. These are just some stills of the tree shakers in winter time. Of course, there were no leaves, but there's snow, and he was so smart to start recording and then select the telephone number that led to the mini avalanche. Kind of a beautiful nature phenomenon. So that was the first project, and now I want to show a couple of projects which are, I think, a bit more conventional as landscape designs, but that take place in a forest where we consciously try to make use of the forest, but also had ambitions for the forest to actually improve it. And what we notice in these projects is that actually, even though we have these ambitions to further diversify the forest, to add, to take out invasive species, to do sort of creative maintenance of the forest, while also occupying some spaces in that forest for other activities. We've started to find out throughout the years that let's say, occupying parts of the forest, chopping away some trees, that part works, but somehow the positive agenda for the forest regeneration is somehow hard to organize within a framework of a conventional design project. So this is Sports Park in Genk. Here you see the plan. It's a quite a nice location in Belgium with a large swimming pool and a new multifunctional sports hall and some open air sports fields next to it in a very beautiful natural setting. And the project was to this started with a competition to add some more, to actually add a square in between the two sports buildings and to load it with a lot of outdoor sports program. This is what you see here on the left. You see the two buildings. They both have kind of a nice sculptural shape. And this is what they asked for, so sort of dense urban program square. And what we proposed was actually to disperse all that program into the forest. So each of these sports activities could take place in this beautiful setting of the forest. And somehow we also introduced this 500-meter running track that also formed a sort of a backbone for these different activities in the forest. As I said, next to it, we also proposed to create more biodiversity in the forest. There were a lot of invasive species, and it was kind of a monoculture or a limited set of trees that you could find here. And together with forest ecologists, we developed this sort of strategy of selective chopping of trees to let new light into the forest so a new species can start to grow. And also what's important is that you get a variety in age. Many of the forests we have in Western Europe are planted and planted in one go, and therefore a lot of these trees have the same age, which is not that great, because then they're very likely to also all die at the same time, and then you have to start all over with your ecosystem. So it's not that stable. So this sort of selective chopping is a very good strategy to stabilize this forest biotope. Here you see some images just after they did the hardscape in the forest. And yeah, we really like this sort of contrast between the concrete and this natural environment. And somehow it's also fantastic to work in a forest that's already 50 years old. So you already have this natural beauty. Whereas in other landscape projects, if you have to plant all your vegetation, in many times it doesn't look that great in the first 5 to 10 years, because all the planting still needs to get body. Well, it's really well used actually. So it's a popular place now in Genk. And here you can see the different sports activities against the dark woods. But as I said, so the chopping and the concrete part was successful, but eventually the forest regeneration strategy never took place. We can see something parallel happening in a more recent project. This is a design we made together with Taller Architects and LCC in Shenzhen. And it's for a forest park. Here you see the existing situation. Shenzhen is a fast-growing city. And next to a planned new part of Shenzhen, a part of the forest is connected to the city, let's say, so people can actually escape from the city and take a breath under the shadow of the trees. So the idea was to add sort of new infrastructure, but also different programs in forest setting. And again, we also had this idea of actively improving the biodiversity of the forest. You see the plan we created with a sort of a gradient. This is an existing golf course, by the way. That was not our idea. This is the planned new town, and from there a gradient from, let's say, relatively busy park around the lake, then going more and more into the dark woods. Here you see that in a section. So here we have the lake, and from there it also gets more hilly, more rough terrain, and more beautiful forest, and more solitude. Here you see part of the central lake and the loop around it, and one of the core ideas was to make the forestry really sort of a central event of the park. And so in the profile of the central loop, we integrated a tree and plant nursery that usually for forests, there is always a tree or plant nursery, but it's somewhere hidden in the corner. And our idea was to make it sort of a central attraction, and also to make people aware of this maintenance of the forest and make them part of it. And so the idea is that here all the species are grown that will be eventually also placed into the forest that you can see in the background. Here you see that in a diagram. Here we marked the zones that we're actually right now really ecologically not that valuable monocultures. And so we proposed this strategy that you can see here, again, this selective chopping and further diversification of the set of trees over time and the variety in age. Well, that section and all the different areas were connected with one long, what we started to call a pedestrian highway. As you could see, there was quite some topography in the terrain, and we wanted to sort of make all these different landscapes accessible, not only for fit people, but also for elderly and maybe families with strollers and small kids. So we created we proposed to have this elevated walkway that never had a larger slope than 5%. So it's very accessible, and from there you can go to these different landscapes. In the process of this project, what happens is that they start with a hardscape and start with the constructions and do the planting last. This is the natural. This is logic to do it like that. The effect is that, of course, it always costs more than expected. And in this case, over half the budget in the end is put into this connecting path. Here we drew it as in the diagram as a red line. Eventually, it also literally became a red path. It's now under construction, and but you can see here they are seriously chopping some forest for this connection. Here you see already part of it built up, not yet painted. This part is already painted, and here you see a sort of a larger piece and how it connects all the way to the far hills in this area. So in the end, construction cost of this thing got much bigger, and the government found out they had less money available. So also here, in the end, the foresters' improvement strategy, which was very, very important for this park, it's 600 hectares. So the largest, by far the largest surface is covered in these monocultures, and could be much more. Because of budgetary reasons, also this is cancelled out of the project. And very pragmatically, also the name of the park is changed from Forest Park to Red Path Park. So somehow also, we'll have to conclude that it seems that the forest in the end is a bit of a victim of this process. Still, it will be very cool, but let's say our ambitions to also contribute to the local ecology, they at this point, at least, because of all the difficulties of the process, have seemed to be hard to realize. And then a last one, which was even more extreme. There was a project, a proposal or a design we made for a new city park in The Hague, called International Park, because it's surrounded by all the embassies of The Hague, and what you can see here is the Peace Palace. And it's already sort of a beautiful carpet of trees. And the ambition of the city was to make this accessible for the people of The Hague. It only has one city park at this moment, which is kind of crowded, and their idea was to create a second city park and to share the beauty of this place with more people in the city. It was a competition we won it. We made this plan. It was a fairly calm plan to our standards, also because of this sort of setting, which was slightly conservative with all the different embassies and rich villas around it. And we also, again, really try to to work with the beauty of this forest, to create this sort of different atmospheres within the forest as a beautiful experience for the visitor. Yet the plan was perceived in a very different way by the people living around it. And he used a photo. This is part of a news article that appeared back then of a protest that was organized by the locals with attendance of over 1,000 people with banners protesting against our plan for this park, because they also perceived, again, regardless of all our noble ambitions for sort of improving the forest, mainly as an operation of urbanizing the forest and therefore also damaging the forest. And that was kind of impressive. So this was really a huge protest, and here they even wrote a song about our office, and it's in Dutch, but I can maybe translate the first part. It says, "A LOLA is crawling through our beautiful forest. His boss Rees, that was the alderman of the city, unleashed him here. Look out, children, big and small. A LOLA bite can be lethal. If you see a LOLA on your path, yeah, it's really possible in this city. Then be very quiet and call 112. That's our 911. And then the fire brigade will come and take him with him." Yeah, so they were very emotional, and they had a very strong protest also online on Facebook and everything. And this led in the end to an abortion of this the whole project. So we didn't get further than this sort of master plan phase. And there was the ambition to really to build a project. They already reserved quite a large sum of money, but they decided to abort this whole operation. But this also made us think, like, hey, we're landscape architects. We are the ones that bring the green to the people, and somehow here we're bad guys, you know. And we noticed this in more projects, and started to feel the necessity to engage more with let's say the good calls, and maybe follow different strategies to get there. And of course, over time, also climate change became a more and more important topic, and this became also subject for us, both in studies we initiated ourselves, and also just more conventional work. And what we see in landscape architecture is that the vast majority of the work here is about climate adaptation. So it's about dealing with the problems created by climate change. And in many cases, this is about water and dealing with the new water conditions, sea level rise, increasing rainwater, increasing droughts. We already did a big study on the Dutch dikes, and I made a sort of thorough analysis of the Dutch water system and how this changed over time to deal with this ever-changing water or ever-changing conditions. And at a certain moment, we developed this plan because we started to realize that there is a substantial chance that we cannot just keep on adjusting our system of dikes in the far future. So let's say next 50 years is fine. But if we look at the year of 2200, sea level rise is very stable. It's not as so it's easier to look further into the future. If we look at that time horizon, we came to the conclusion that there is a reasonable chance that people we will not be able to sustain the land we have, and therefore we did a proposal, sort of a optimistic proposal for how to deal with a scenario where we have to give up a part of our land. And we started to think of how to organize infrastructure, our cities, our agriculture. And obviously this is far into the future, but there are some, it's I think mainly useful to already now make strategic choices of where to invest or where to locate your urban growth and where to invest in new infrastructure. So you're also able to build cities and landscapes that are sustainable also in the long future. Well, on a more concrete scale, you see here a project we did in a large greenhouse area, which is we have this huge pancake of greenhouses in the west of the country, close to Rotterdam. And there also, due to climate change, they have a lot of rainwater problems, and we created this sort of huge water buffer around the sort of originally tiny water stream. And this was also an opportunity to create a very rich ecological area. Here you see some images of that. And another project we're working on right now is in Almere, one of the new towns in the Netherlands, where also to, let's say, from the agenda to buffer more rainwater, this central square we turn it into a rainwater garden. So yeah, there is a lot of work in this climate adaptation, and I think it's the central theme within the field of landscape architecture on what we can contribute to solving the problems of climate change. Nevertheless, it's not completely satisfactory because we're just solving the problems climate change is causing, but we're not solving the problem itself. And so yeah, more and more we also feel it would be great if we could also really contribute to this to solving this problem. And we feel that we are convinced that forestry is a part of this solution. And that's how we got to the topic and started investigating it. So now I'll get to the somewhat tougher part of this presentation, but very interesting, I think. So how it works, how the forests are behaving over time, and also how they can contribute to the problem of climate change. Basically, what's happening is that what we're doing now is we're burning up the forests that were growing 300 million years ago, that turned into oil and gas, and they're now growing into the air. The forests of the past and this carbon they captured in the soil are now being thrown into the air. First, a bit about the forests themselves. They come and go over time. So they're not able with climate change of glacial times. Also the occupation of forests in our world is fluctuating. So in the last glacial period, you could see there was not so much forest, lots of extreme desert, and actually the best times were early Holocene. And so the temperature was beneficial for trees to grow. And another thing that happened is that megafauna got extinct. So the ones that were actually trashing these forests, they were gone. And then you could see this sort of big coverage of large parts of continents in closed forest. So that was great, but then not long after that, actually humans arrived, and they started to cause new trouble. And ever since, actually, you can see the coverage of forests has decreased. And the main thing was actually people taking pieces of forest into cultivation. Burning it for hunting grounds or for agriculture. And so this is a process with growth of population took place all around the world, and one important reason for the decrease of forest in the world. Right now, this deforestation is still going on. You can see the world map and also the different processes that take place or that cause this deforestation. In red, you can see commodity-driven deforestation, mainly plantations. In yellow, it's agriculture, taking piece of forest. Then in green, you see forestry, so just chopping forest wild to wood production forests. Wildfires are also an increasing problem. Then we have urbanization. As you can see, it's not really on a global scale, not really an issue. You could say, if you take the main reasons, that 75% is right now caused by wildfires, new agriculture, and plantations all around the world. Behind these deforestation, there's a whole world of underlying drivers. This has to do with failing governments, corruption, people to make money out of this, so illegal activities. And this is very hard to control. And that's why also it's so hard to stop this deforestation in some parts of the world. But this is not the whole story, because now we were just talking about deforestation, but there's also reforestation, afforestation, and also just thriving forests. And that's what you see here. And if you look at the balance, you can actually note that in the last 30 years, 35 years, there is a net gain of amount of forest in the world. And especially in the northern areas, you can see here there's a bit of forest loss on one side, but actually quite some growth of forest. And the more south you go, the more difficult it gets. And what's also interesting to see is that part of this is because of plantations or new forestry and forest projects. Also, part of this is because of climate change. That just different vegetation areas are shifting, and more places, especially in the colder areas and also towards higher parts of mountains, gets actually suitable for forests to grow. And too, in the air means also faster growth of these forests. But there's still quite some trouble there in the tropical zone. There's a massive deforestation still going on. Brazil, Congo, in Asia, in Indonesia. And this is quite serious because these are very important forests in the world, and they also have a big impact on the climate systems. So deforestation here means also destabilization of the weather and the rainfall increasing or decreasing in large parts of the world. So this is a very serious problem, and this is also expected to continue in the future. IPCC created all these different scenarios, and they also expect this trend to continue in all scenarios in the future. Another thing that happens through climate change is sort of this sudden heating up of Earth leads to desertification, degrading lands, and erosion. And this is also increasingly a problem in large parts of the world. So that's the story about the forest and sort of the dynamics of these forests. Now we get to the problem of climate change, which of course is caused by this increasing concentration of carbon in our atmosphere, and our big challenge to stop this increase and even decrease this concentration. Here you see that this is a nice way of looking at it, that they have a certain CO2 budget, and they can still consume. We don't want to let the Earth warm up more than 2 degrees. And how it looks now, we have 25 years still to consume or just to blow the CO2 into the air before our budget is finished, and then let's say Earth will warm up even more. The carbon is part of the world, and it's either in the ocean, the soil, or in the atmosphere. And I started with this image of let's say the factories taking all this stored carbon and blowing it into the air. That's the big arrow we see over here, and of course, main problem of this climate change. So from gas reserves, oil and coal reserves, this is thrown into the air. Land use also causes a bit of extra carbon into the atmosphere, but it also takes up quite some. And this is kind of imbalanced if we look at it now. So the total on land through agriculture or other forest fires and so on, the amount of carbon put into the atmosphere is somehow imbalanced with the amount absorbed by vegetation mainly. And the ocean plays also a big role. Here we see it in another diagram. So basically there's land carbon, atmosphere carbon, and ocean carbon. And this is and this balance is now not how we want it. Here this is an interesting chart where we see a carbon cycle evolution after 1850. And here you see on the top side, you see emissions, and here you see uptake. And so this is the emission up to 2015, roughly. You can see how the industry and burning of fossil fuels kind of were the main cause of this emission of carbon. Land use change kind of stable over time, and then you see over time also an increase of the uptake of the ocean and also land. But the majority is taken up by the atmosphere, and that's of course the big problem. The challenge we face to get it out of the and put it into this green. And of course, on the other side, very important to just stop this emission of carbon. So we need to work on all sides, but let's say the challenge we focus on is how can we store more carbon on land, take it out of the atmosphere and store it on land. That works a bit like this. So it's absorbed by vegetation, captured by vegetation in living biomass, which dies and then slowly decays and gets stored into the soil. This is where the real, so of course parts is stored in the tree logs, but the real storage takes place in the soil eventually. As you can imagine, the trees themselves, they well, forest fires, part of it gets composted, and then also part of the CO2 is again released into the air. Used for different purposes, used for timber, and then burned maybe 100 years later. The real storage takes place in the soil. But this is also part of this forest system. There's a lot of discussion going on whether it really helps or not. Different camps in there, whether it's like the best solution. In last year, in the latest IPCC report, they come to the conclusion that it's actually, let's say, capturing CO2 via vegetation, forests, is a necessary step in combating climate change. So we highlighted one sentence: all assessed modeled pathways that are warming to 1.5 degrees or well below 2 degrees require land-based mitigation and land use change. Most including different combinations of reforestation, afforestation, reduced deforestation. So it's seen as a necessary step in our big project to stop climate change. So it's about this sort of land-based, nature-based solutions. And here you see an overview of, let's say, the different measures you can take on land to capturing CO2. And there you can also see that actually the top two are by far the most effective, and that's reforestation and natural forest management. Basically, a large part of the solution also to just avoid these rainforests from being to protect existing forests. So, but you can see the winner in this diagram is reforestation, and this is also the topic that we think is good to engage with. Very important side notes, though, to also correct this discussion that's going on. We shouldn't pretend as if we can solve climate change with new forests. You know, it's not like we can do whatever as long as we plant a lot of trees. That's what we can see here. Is sort of forestry can only take part of it of the total solution, and especially towards the future. If we would go on with business as usual emission, in the end it doesn't hardly solve anything. So it's really a part of the solution, but of course just stopping consumption of fossil fuel is much more important to also focus on. And then what's cool about these forests is that it's not just about climate change, but there is also this whole slipstream of other benefits of forests that you can organize with. That's what makes this much more inspiring than many other, in my opinion, many other measures that to be taken. Let's say farms do always improve the landscape or make people happy, even though they are part of the solution. Forests have this amazing combination of qualities. So it leads, it generates income for people, food, can generate energy. It's good for health, also for safety, and yeah. So I think it's also important when thinking about forestry to not just about CO2 uptake, but also about all these extra values that you can have in these forests. Forestry as an important solution is, of course, discovered by people, and there's also more and more actors in the field that engage with this. Some of them more focused on cooperation, and some of them, let's say, with a more broader environmental focus, and a sort of one that are see let's say the economy as a threat, and others that see it as a solution. With our projects, we're right now focusing more on this group over here. So with you could say the far right corner, broader environmental focus, and but working with the economy rather than seeing it as a threat. And you can see more and more initiatives that are started to start large forestation projects, and the one is even more ambitious than the other. What about this one? The trillion trees vision. That's quite ambitious to plant 1 trillion new trees. And what's also interesting, let's say, is that there's also this ecosystem of financial possibilities or money to fund these projects. And so when dealing with forestry, you also have to deal with all these flows of money and see where you can tap into to actually fund your project. So what we can see is that with all these ambitions and all these sort of new actors and big programs and funding options, all these ambitious start, but many of them do not lead to desirable end results. And what you can see is just because of the scale of these projects, that there's apparently not enough time to think, to manage it well, or to combine it with more of these other values. And it seemed to be in many cases mainly quantity driven, and which leads to not so inspiring monocultures. As you can see here in these pine plantations in South Africa, eucalyptus reforestation in Brazil, which are from an ecological point of view absolutely worthless, and also this ambitious project of stopping the desertification in China, which is in a sense a main project to build a great green wall of trees, is also not so successful because of its remote approach, with too little variety in species, and also in the end, because of that huge death toll, 4 out of 5 trees has died in this project. Also, in Canada, you can see that forests were not placed. So where there used to be sort of quite precious bogs, swamp areas, this was drained to new forests, leading to forest fires and creating more of a problem than solving something. And this is an example of monoculture in Ireland, where also the people in the end didn't accept it anymore. So here you can see a news article that's about an ecological dead zone, and here you can see photos of a protest against this type of forestry. Communities, not conifers, and dark woods are not means any quality for the beauty of Ireland. So we can see that the final results do not really align with the original ambitions. And also more recent phenomenon is that also there's grassroots initiatives. So not just this sort of government-driven projects are taking place. Kind of cool. This is Mr. Beast. It's a famous vlogger that was challenged to do something for climate change, and he decided to set a goal to plant 20 million trees, and he used his fan base to make this happen. And it's kind of funny videos. There you can also again see, well, at least me as a landscape architect also see a problem, because here you can see what they do. They're also turning quite a nice park space, I would say, with a lawn and some solitary trees. It looks like an environment to me, in a fully uncoordinated way with fans of this vlogger. They're turning this into a forest, and that's where we started thinking, like, hey, these guys, they need a landscape architect, and we need to do something. And let's step in and try to engage with this and see if we can do better projects and inspire other people to do also better projects. This forestry is becoming such a large project in the world that it will have a serious impact on our landscapes. And either this becomes a dull carpet of monocultures, or it becomes a beautiful forest like this early iteration that I was showing. Very inspiring for me was the story of Sebastian Salgado, a famous photographer that was photographing, let's say, misery, the human condition all over the world, and at a certain moment couldn't take it anymore, was fed up with this misery and decided to do something positive. And he bought a plot of land and started to turn it into a forest. And I think this is a beautiful project, and also a beautiful example of how you can engage with something like this. Of course, this one plot does not solve the world problems, but and inspire other people. In the Wim Wenders made a movie about this, Salt of the Earth. It also just creates a beautiful place in the world. So it has a place of beauty. And this is just seems like a realistic goal to set. And from that perspective, we start looking what we could do. So maybe a bit naive. First thing I started to do was just to scout for plots of land, and to I was thinking I need sort of a probably best is to take cheap land, because well we don't have that much money to spend on it, but also to focus on degraded lands. This idea of turning half desert into forest again, to not only have more trees, but also to bring back or to repair an ecosystem. And I then thought it's also probably wise to start in sort of relatively stable government. So I ended up in Spain, scouting for different plots of land. And as you can see, I mean, this is quite amazing, actually. You can get very, very cheap land. These look quite green, but there's also really deserted or desertified pieces of land that you can buy. And so my first idea was to just buy it and start making a plan for it, plant it, do it. Let's say, taking this Salgado as an example. But then, of course, you bump into 1,000 problems. And at a certain moment, I was happy to read an article about this company in Amsterdam, Landlife company, that was actually more or less doing the same, but was doing this already for 10 years and developed a lot of know-how and had a sort of a solid crew of 35 people. Our office is also 35 people, so it's sort of same size, with lots of also forestry experts in it. And this company, there was a very inspiring news article I read, interview with them. And then I contacted or wrote them a letter after I read it, and said like, hey, I think you guys need a landscape architect. And let's put your projects into good examples of Dutch design. And then it was silent for 2 or 3 months, and then they called us and they said they were actually interested. And from there on, the collaboration started. First, a bit about the company. What's cool is that they're very ambitious as well. So they have goals. They now embarked on this project to plant 1 tree for every European in Europe. So this is 500 million trees. So there's these big, ambitious projects. They know how to reach the media, and they work with on the basis of this CO2 compensation. Or they fund themselves with that. So how it works is that they plant a piece of forest for someone else, and then they receive the CO2 rights for this. And these CO2 rights, they sell them to whoever wants to buy them. So that's the sort of the financial system behind this. And they're doing projects all over the world, as you can see, in almost all continents. And they really also work with locals everywhere and local know-how to make this happen. What we like is that they really have this sort of broad approach. So it's not just about the CO2 capturing, but it's really about all these different values. And they also really focus on this sort of degraded land, lost to wildfires, over farming, global warming, urbanization, and deforestation, as the sort of the most the place where the areas where we know for sure that it will be beneficial to the world. What we especially like is that they're also kind of geeky. So they are really into the technology and really experimental and ambitious in that part of also innovating the process of forestry. So they work with automated planting systems. They monitor all their forests over time to also measure the carbon uptake. And they're also working on autonomous planting machines, which is very cool. And they have a sort of, this monitoring is very advanced. So from each of their parcels, they're really, so unlike these examples you showed earlier, where there is this big campaign going on to plant a lot of trees, and then 10 years later, everybody finds out it's actually not that great. They're every year checking how it goes with their forests, and if it really, and also try to learn from that to improve this process of forestry. Well, here you can see how they love their trees. And this is part of their the innovations. They also brought the way of planting to. They really, over time, found out how to let these trees survive in different harsh climates all over the world without maintenance. So they strive for zero maintenance forests, and this is an innovation that creates a very high survival rate for these trees. And here you can see a project in that they're doing in Spain, and that's where we stepped in and also thought we can contribute to this, to their because they have it's a very advanced approach, but it's still a pure, let's say, ecology and technology or engineering approach. And we feel we can do much more there. And we do this on different levels. And now I start with this sort of first project we are doing with them, and where we are also inventing how to work as a landscape architects with them in their projects and also in their reality. Like it's also a reality. It's not like designing a park, you know, that these projects are also about efficiency, efficient planning, working with the locals and the constraints, the local authorities and the constraints they bring. So we're learning how to work on this, but we see that there's mainly sort of two levels on which you can help developing these forests. And the first one is on the level of the sort of the total area and the parcellation of this area, and the other one is on the level of the individual parcel, the plot, and the actual planting on that plot. Both projects are in Spain. This was a project or a site of over 100 hectares, 120 hectares. That used to be a forest, but there was a forest fire wiping out the whole forest. So this needed to be reforested. Here you see it on site, and you can't plant it all in one go. The idea is that you subdivide it into individual plots with more or less same conditions, and you sort of write the recipe for each of the plots. That's usually done in a sort of a very engineering way, and we try to bring a bit more of landscape logic and also bring a bit more of sort of spatial quality to that. But this part is in a way, it's very dry. It's very it's about small things, like small gains in quality. But I'll walk you through it. So here you see the area and sort of the different specificities of the landscape. There's this electricity line running through. There is a sort of national walking route along the edge and another walking route along the edge. And there are several bouldering places. It's sort of, there's big rocks spread out over this area where people like to do bouldering. And you can see there's this topography with a sort of a valley structure and a small stream running through the south. So we try to sort of look to this different landscape features and translate those into a parcellation. First of all, we looked at the slope orientation, and you can and basically there's a big difference between north slopes and south slopes. So we said, okay, let's make that first separation between sort of the colder forests on facing north and the warmer forests facing south, and they can have a different mix of trees. Then there is the valley. We analyzed a bit how this looks like, and partially this is flooded, so it's water, so you can't plant trees there. But also, of course, also this gradient from wet to dry is ecologically very interesting, and we felt that, let's say, the conventional planting method would not be the best one here, and maybe you should take this also as an attractive landscape, but also as an area to introduce a bit more sensitivity to the ecological potential. And to basically decide parts of it are not planted, other parts are sort of less densely forested. In the end, defining a sort of a valley parcel that will get a different planting strategy than a conventional one. Same thing goes for the rocks that we can find on site. Here you see some of them, they're quite nice. You can imagine that it's attractive, that this has attracted people to boulder on. And we spotted the ones that were actually actively in use for bouldering. And we said, okay, let's create sort of a biotope around that, where again, we will plant with a bit more sensitivity to the spatial quality. And sort of setting an atmosphere around this around these rocks. Here you see it a bit more in detail, and here we could also introduce different methods of planting. Most of the planting is done mechanically with a machine, and here we could even sow planting. So this will take more time, but also leads to a forest in the end, but a more natural one. Here you see image of the area, how it looks now. And we thought it was also interesting as an experience to say, okay, let's hide some really in the forest and otherwise keep them in the open, so you have a view as a reward of climbing the rock. There is the existing infrastructure, this power line plus sort of the roads, surface roads leading to that power line and the electricity pylons over there. And we thought that would be great to also use them to create fire breaks. So to keep them free from planting and not just the necessary strip, but the sort of wider part. To avoid actually the same scenario that happened a couple of years ago to take place, that all the site will catch a fire one day and we can start all over again. So to introduce these fire breaks seems like a smart thing to do. And then there's these existing routes, and we thought it would be also nice to just have a sort of a route through the area. This could be just a couple of poles that lead you through the area, so you can actually enjoy also this new forest and the variety that will get there over time. And we spotted the viewpoints. Now everything got burned. It's kind of easy to see where you have the nice free views. And we thought it would be cool to keep those places open and not place any to not plant those areas. So you have some photo moments also in this area, leading to sort of this concept plan, leading to a parcellation proposal. Each of these parcels will be numbered, and then for each of the parcels individually, a planting plan will be made. This was the idea. It was much appreciated in the end because of time. They were not. They were not able to follow some of the advices that we did, but they also said we will definitely try again on the next forestry project there. Well, and here you see it's still in view. Then we get to the most interesting part, I think, and that's the individual plots and the I'm talking quite long. Yeah, I'm almost done. 10 minutes, 5 to 10. And that's about the actual planting of the trees. This is another project in Spain where we focused on that, and they gave us, and here you can see on the right, actually the forestry project, the degraded lands at the edges of agricultural area and river valley that should become part of the ecosystem of that valley again. That's the big project. You see the parcellation, how they did it. So we were not involved in that. And they also here, they had some experimental plots. So here you can see a plot that's, that they plan to use to just try out stuff. So there's the conventional planting. This is sort of a result of their 10 years of trying out efficient ways of forestation. And this is how that happens, is that they just dig holes. They put in some fertile soil and they plant a tree. They irrigate once and that's it. But this happens still in rows in a grid. And here more things are possible, because this they use for actually to build up new knowledge for the future. So how it works is that they also have ecologists working for them that actually check the surroundings and what the natural vegetation is. And their principle is just to connect to that natural vegetation, the stable natural vegetation that they can find in the surroundings, to really contribute to the local ecosystem and to make it stronger. And that leads to a sort of a list of species, and also to a percentage of each of these species in that mix. Here is the Quercus pyrenaica, the oak from the Pyrenees. What we started to do is we said, because we had the feeling like you cannot treat this as an individual design where you just try to do something intuitive that's nice, because also this challenge of forestation is so large that you have to be able to at certain moments get up to speed and to do like large quantities in a relatively short time. So we try to think more of a system to design rather than to make the design itself. And therefore we went to, we started to use Grasshopper to script actually the forest. And that's what you can see here. This is sort of our machine, and how we start to build in parameters, and each of these parameters is taking care of one of these values that the forest could have, let's say, to create eventually a sort of a rich rich forest. And so, well, here you see sort of step one, where we are very close to this conventional way of working of them. So this is the grid. This is the percentage that and the density of trees that they gave to us. So this is how they normally plant it. We gave each of the trees one symbol, and they are represented here in the parcel. Well, here the grasshopper just randomly distributed the trees over the site, following that logic. And now we start to play, and yeah, here. And we start to break the grid. So here we say still stick to the principle of 4 meter distance between the different trees. Planting distance 4 meter, but not necessarily in a grid. And what's interesting is that then you actually have more efficiency, because still, this is a very theoretical story, of course, but still some space is lost here in these corners between the trees. And there we go from 5,800 to 5,900 trees. So there is a sort of efficiency, while at the same time, of course, the forest gets more appealing, because no one wants to enjoys walking in a grid forest. And this already starts to look a bit more natural and a bit more appealing also for people. So that's sort of step one. And then what we started to do is say, okay, let's stick to the same amount of trees, but now look at the individual tree species. And each of the tree species actually needs a different planting distance. So you have bigger trees and smaller trees. And of course you can, for instance, this Crategus, you can plant it much closer to each other than these Pyrenees oak tree or the birch tree that we have over there. So we started following, let's say, the natural size and need for space of these individual trees, put it into the machine, and you can see already sort of a diversification taking place. Some trees getting closer to each other, and other places actually here, because we kept the same total amount of trees, also some open spaces started to emerge here. Another thing is that a forest, of course, not all trees are standing just next to each other. If you have a small tree and a big tree, they can just live, one tree can live on top of the other. So you can have a sort of a overlay of planting. So we started to add that logic to it. So this Crategus is allowed, and the Prunus, the cherry tree, is allowed to live underneath this the bigger brothers. Then we thought it would be interesting to also just give some trees more space, because trees behave completely different in a forest situation. They kind of stay relatively small compared to when they're living growing in an open field. They become much bigger and also much more beautiful. So we thought it's interesting to also create this type of spatial variety that you have in a natural forest after 200 years. But to start with this from the beginning, to say these trees, they just get a lot of space, so they can grow much bigger and get a different habitus. And then we also propose to have open spaces, to take places where we're not planting trees and that just remain open. And that could be either then trees can be sown, so they kind of grow 10 years later or 5 years later start to grow, or they can just be kept open. And then we also suggested some routes, walking routes through the parcel, and added the rule that sort of special food trees and flowering trees are concentrated along this walking route. So you have a sort of somewhat more of a forest entertainment happening along those paths. Well, and that led to sort of this pattern. And what intrigues me is that it's completely computer generated, but already starts to feel natural. And this is just a method, and we can over time also add more values to this script to increase the value of the forest. And also, of course, we can just run the script, and it's also very efficient in the end. So it's also a way we can really deal with large surfaces. And we can take this pattern of symbols and turn them into 3D objects. And we're getting now information from the company, from the tree specialists working there, of the growth speed of the different trees. And we can simulate how the forest will likely grow over time. And that you can see here. So this is 5 years after planted, 15 years after planted, and 30 years after planted. And this is also very important for this forest. And a very important moment for forestry is the moment of canopy closure. So when the trees are that big that they just form a continuous canopy. Then you have very little maintenance, and then the CO2 capture is optimal, is as high as possible. So that's where we are with sort of the 2 first projects that we did. And we're discussing also for the next projects we are about to start with them. Also additional things. First of all is that we are also starting up sort of this parametric approach on the level of the individual tree. Because each tree, of course, has its own qualities, both in terms of ecology, but also in terms of CO2 capture. And maybe also food production. And let's say when we add all those different values to the different trees, we can start to play also with that and propose, for instance, sort of a smart zoning. So areas where we want, let's say, more ecological quality, where it might be more about sort of leisure quality, and so on, and where maybe carbon uptake is the only or the main driver. And then we can offer basically different combinations, or together with the client also say, like, okay, what do you want to achieve with this forest? Let's give a number to those different targets, and then we run different random combinations of parcellation, and then afterwards the software analyzes what the most optimal configuration is to achieve those goals. So this is, let's say, one step more advanced, and we're looking into that now for our next project to see how we could really do this. What's also actually a very cool development is that the company is working on this automated this planting robot. Because right now it's just a guy in a big machine digging a hole, and then someone comes to plant a tree. So this is a relatively primitive system or simple system, What's cool about this development is that if it's fully automated and GIS coordinated, you could basically upload any pattern. The robot doesn't care, and he just plants it in that way. So it becomes almost like 3D printing a forest. And it's expected that this thing is ready to roll in less than 2 years, and we will then also start to do tests with that. And then we can also really start to paint with forests. Here you see some, let's say, more aesthetic patterns that we developed, and we can basically literally plant these types of forests with that technique. So this is where we want to go to in the end. And there is one step more, is that there is even sort of innovation going on, that even maintenance on the long term might be fully automated, leading to nature areas or forestry areas where there's only robots and trees. So there's no human intervention. And everything is just growing and maintained by automatically maintained by robots. And this is a very intriguing idea. And this image of this sort of this natural beauty in which people are no longer there, I think is very inspiring, and made me think of this quote that you might know, that the question, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And you could question the same about the beauty of the forest. Is that if there's no one to see it, what sense does it make? But for me, the idea that there is all this beauty out there that you can visit if you would want to is a great and inspiring thought for me. Then I get to the end of the presentation. This is my last slide. I just wanted to say that this is, I'm really convinced that this is a very large task for us all in the coming years, decade especially, to plant these forests. I think we are needed as designers to help this into a good direction. Yeah, there's, I think, an opportunity for everyone. This is a article from 20th of May, not too long ago, where again another ambitious project from the EU to plant 3 billion trees is being launched. And I think you all can take part in this. That's it. Thank you for your attention. Now, we get to the last part where I have on my phone, I'm receiving questions from the audience. I have no clue if anyone is listening, at least one person. Joanna, she's asking, thank you very much for the insight into your work. Do you have experience in afforestation in relation to trees' effect to the underground? For instance, to use the ability of roots to bind soil and increase the ability to hold water as a design tool. In the course of my master thesis, I'm looking into the potential of planting forests to stabilize the ground in low-lying sandy plains in Denmark that are affected by floodings due to climate change. How do you choose tree species, and which sizes, ages of trees do you plant? Okay, well, first part, this is actually the core of these the core operation of these the projects of Land Life Company. This is exactly what is happening with this degraded land. Thanks to many reasons, due to many reasons, plants stopped growing there, and the soil started to lose its structure, becoming also incapable to host new vegetation. And so then, let's say, planting these forests or planting these new trees that start to develop their root system is also the start of creating a new microclimate, a new soil structure. And this can be really be the first step, basically, into the regeneration of a whole ecosystem. Yeah, that's the main idea, actually, and this seems to really work. Also, I was kind of debunking this Chinese Great Green Wall, but also there, of course, they learned from their first mistakes, and they're doing it now much better. But also there, its the main operation is to stop this desertification and to use the trees to improve the soil structure. So in the end, also all the other layers of the forest can start to grow. The second question: how do you choose tree species and which sizes, ages of trees do you plant? This is something we do in very close that we do in close collaboration with the other company. They're the specialists on this. And they also they tested a lot of different strategies there. One of the things they learned is that you, for instance, always have to work with locally plant material from local plant nurseries. So they also did some projects because there's always large numbers. Not always all the plant nurseries have these, or tree nurseries have the amount of trees available. So they had these examples where they had to bring in trees from far away to actually plant all these trees. And then they could also see that there was a sort of a high death rate after that. So actually that was not so successful. If you grow them locally, survival rate is much bigger. And yeah, the same is also with the size of the trees. In many cases, it's best to start just with a tiny tree. So it really starts growing in the conditions it will be in for the rest of its life. But it depends also for them a bit on the goals of the forestry and the targets they get to in their project. So when it's about CO2 uptake, these young trees they take some time before they can actually capture enough CO2. So they're not that efficient in the first years. Then next question. Andre asks, what is your vision on of urban landscaping systems, such as the vertical forests in the project of Stefano Boeri, Bosco Verticale? I think they're amazing. No, I mean, let's say what I've shown is just this sort of maybe it will grow out to be a branch of our company, LOLA Forestry. But let's say it's just a part of the work we do. But I think that the theme of integrating nature into our daily lives, just for our own sake, our own health alone is incredibly important. And apart from that, it can also just help to create a better microclimate and all these things. So yeah, it's of course these systems are also relatively vulnerable. So the more you get into the city, the more it becomes like gardening and something that needs to be carefully maintained and needs a lot of attention. But still, let's say, especially from a sort of human perspective, we think this is very, very important. And it can be also a way to attract nature into the city, and everyone needs this. And it's very important to just lead a happy life and healthy life in an urban environment. But it won't solve climate change, let's say. I think that's the other thing. So it's just a different, let's say there the effect is so small that you can basically, it doesn't do anything on a world scale. And therefore, that was the reason why we started to also look at this, this forestry in remote areas, which maybe at first glance is also a bit, is not that exciting because it's not, yeah, it won't be visited by a lot of people. Yeah, but there I think you can create much more of an effect in the end. Isabella is the next one that asks a question. Can we name planting lots of trees in the city, the urban forests? Can we name planting lots of trees? Can we name planting lots of trees in the city, the urban forest? Is it a forest? I'm not sure if I understand this question, but let's say, let me just interpret it in my way. So are these urban forests real forests? Is it a real forest? I would say yes. I mean, the point with nature in general is that and that's a bit also how I started, is that we have this notion of nature as wilderness, and we, you know, as soon as we see a bit of irregularity and no constructions, we perceive our environment quickly as wilderness. But if you really look closely, most parts of the world are maintained and are planned and are really controlled by people. So there's always, I think you can say that there is a sort of a gradient from complete wilderness to complete artificial nature, and I would say the whole, as we as humans are part of nature, this whole gradient is nature, and everywhere where you are on that line of the gradient, you can find valuable nature, I think. So we can definitely talk about forests, I think, albeit, of course, in a slightly more controlled and artificial way. Liuda asks, first of all, thank you. As far as I understand, the project LOLA works on with our larger projects. Are there any examples of smaller actions that city residents can take to contribute to making our surroundings greener that you personally like? An example that comes to my mind is seed bombing or guerrilla gardening, which was one of the examples in your presentation. No, I think it's absolutely inspiring what citizens are doing nowadays when it comes to greenifying the city. If I talk about our city here, Rotterdam, we saw this, I think it was kind of boosted by the economic crisis in 2008. People had, I guess, more time to spare and started to shift focus. And we saw a lot of sort of grassroots projects popping up to greenify streets, to start to maintain certain parts of leftover land and to turn it into vegetable gardens or into small nature reserves. And at a certain moment, we saw so much of that we started to make a map out of this. And this was, I don't think I can find it this quickly, but we called it the new Nature Map of Rotterdam, where we spotted all those initiatives and put them on the background of all the sort of leftover spaces of the city around, mainly around infrastructure, so railways, highways, and what you could see is that there was almost this sort of fully connected structure in the city that was just full of these initiatives. And we thought it was absolutely fantastic because the city, of course, has its own planned and formal green structure. And there was this whole other green structure in the city, which was grassroots, with a lot of ecological quality, with a lot of social value. Yeah, we were really inspired by this, and also ourselves, we contributed to this system as a sort of a step, and we created a food garden in the harbor area in Rotterdam. So that's really on the smallest scale. I hope this answers your question. Then the last one, Thijs, sounds Dutch. Hello, Thijs. Is sowing trees in a randomized mix with certain percentages of certain trees not more easy way of creating a more natural forest? Yes. Easy, definitely. But more successful is maybe the question. What I've learned from this, and this is I'm not a specialist here, so much of what I'm telling now is also what I just heard a couple of months ago from our colleagues of the Forestry company. Is that this just really remains depends on where you are. For instance, if you're in a tropical area, the best thing to do is nothing, because the forest grows, the conditions are so good there that if you do nothing, within no time, a natural forest pops out of the ground. The more harsh the climate, the more difficult this sort of spontaneous growth is. And if you really go to this sort of desertified areas, these seeds won't survive. So that's as simple as that. And it's just so you need more help. You need to pull some more artificial tricks, as I was showing also with this basket with sort of a water reservoir and also where condense is being collected, to really go from something as hostile as a desertified land to back again a forest. So the different strategies are possible, and it's also I think I also showed that in these two projects we're also proposing to take some parts where we are seeding instead of planting. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.